In our previous video, and look, there's the link, we talked about having to solve the problem of players whose characters are trying to hide from the problems. Now we're going on to kind of the opposite problems you could have with your players in a horror scenario if they're really combative. Now, if you're playing Call of Cthulhu, your players can buy a gun in many countries or in time periods. If you're playing a fantasy game, they can wield other weapons. They may have magic swords, staffs, things like that. Now, let me make it clear again, the players aren't your enemies. You're having fun with them. You want them to have fun. I hope you're not trying to funnel the players into your own perceived notions of gaming. RPGs are a group effort in which everyone should participate. But since you're the game master, you have the greatest responsibility. The players can police each other to a certain extent, but nobody can police you. Now, presumably the players want to be in a horror game. You want the game to be fun. The players don't know how the plot's supposed to go. It's not always their fault if they resort to violence right away. Also, to make it clear, the problem is not that violence is bad. It's that if you're running a horror game, you also want suspense. You don't need suspense if you're fighting a mob of orcs. But in a horror game, you want creepy reveals. You want sneaking through dark corridors. You don't want people to run into battle immediately when they hear like a creaking door open in the dark room. They like, well, turn on the lights and shoot it. That's not what you want. And the reason you don't is because you want to ensure the players have fun. So when I talk about players being lame, they're your friends. You're trying to help them. In one game I ran, I was at a convention in Germany, and maybe that has something to do with it because German civilians don't usually have access to guns. The scenario took place in America, and and the characters all immediately went on and bought guns. I didn't care because the scenario was actually about Dracula. Dracula was basically running well, it mattered to a blood bank. I know it sounds kind of funny, but it was pretty scary in the story. And so the players eventually figured out that the bad guy was Dracula. And one of the guys went into Dracula's office in the blood bank, and Dracula's there. And so I said, oh, he's spooky. He rises up, where he's behind you, and the ground's made of dirt in his office. It was an office, but it had dirt in a coffin, you know. And the guy said, I'm going to turn on him. I said, okay. His fangs drip as he moves forward. And he said, I'm going to shoot him. I said, what? He's going to shoot Dracula. I said, okay. So he shoots Dracula. And I didn't even bother to roll damage. I said, oh, well, you hit him right in the heart. And he goes, yes. And I said, Dracula comes to get you. And then he kept shooting Dracula until finally I couldn't take it anymore. He emptied his gun. Then I had, Dracula eat him. And I said, what the heck? Why are you shooting Dracula? Have you ever seen a movie where you can shoot a vampire? What's wrong with you? Well, I didn't say that, actually. I just was amazed that he just kept shooting the monster. And maybe it's because he really wanted to use his gun, or maybe he thought that's what the character would do. I don't know. How do you keep someone going into battle and doing something odd like that? Now, in this case, it kind of worked out for me because the other players then were afraid of Dracula because they knew he could take a whole clip of bullets. So now again, fighting has its place in a horror game. Sometimes you want them to fight, but to be horrific, fighting should not always be the obvious way to win. Let me give some examples of when fighting is appropriate. It could be a last-ditch attempt to escape, such as this movie, The Mummy. Peter Cushing is attacked by the mummy, who's Christopher Lee. In this battle, he drives a spear completely through the mummy. Of course, it doesn't kill it, but it oh my gosh, the mummy's terrifying. He does save his life in the fight. It makes the fight horrifying. Another possibility is, like in most zombie movies, your fight could stave off something that will eventually overwhelm you. Killing them won't save the day, but you can slow down your destruction, maybe give you time for something else. Or perhaps what you want in your scenario is a final, giant, terrifying boss battle, like in the movie Brain Dead. That's fine. These are great. But the final boss battle is always scary because there's a final boss. Having a monster you're fighting off just because you're forced into it, having a monster that you're trying to hold off for a little bit to do something else, these are fine. But having players run through the scenario, treating the monsters like cannon fodder, that's not fine for a horror game all the time. It makes the scenario less scary, and no one wants that. So imagine we're doing this scenario we talked about in the first episode, our Frankenstein variant. Mad scientist or wizard makes a monster, the monster runs amok. Now, we don't want the heroes to think that their solution is, let's go kill the monster. For one thing, any monster worth its chops will probably kill the players if they attack it before they've done enough background research, and then no more game, right? So how can you teach them not to go off immediately and plunge into the attack? Okay, well, don't make my mistake. I assume that any numbskull would know that you can't shoot Dracula. But you have a couple of techniques at your disposal. First, we can steal an idea that's used in a million action movies. How often have you seen a movie where the first scene is some tough guys showing up for some kind of deal, possibly a drug deal? Then another group shows up, things go wrong, and the second group blows away the tough-looking guys viciously and violently. And the purpose of this is that the first group of tough guys was literally only there to show how tough the actual real bad guys, the second group, is. Then the rest of the movie is the real bad guys versus the heroes. What the filmmakers did, if they're making their cheap B movie, is they showed you how lethal the bad guys were by showing them defeating someone that was obviously tough. So then you know the bad guys are tough because they did this. So as an example, let's take Batman, okay, or actually The Dark Knight. The opening scene of The Dark Knight, you see the Joker's gang pull off a bank robbery, and they do it really well and slick, and he's not afraid of the mafia, and he kills all his buddies because he's so evil, and you're left going, whoa, the Joker's really cool, he's super smart, everything is organized, he's got things put together. I know organization doesn't sound like, I mean, the Joker at one point says, do I look like a guy with a plan? And the fact is, if you think back to the bank robbery, he's got to have a plan, right? So it shows how cool the Joker is. How can you do this in a horror game? It's easy. You choose a group in your world that your players would respect, then have them wiped out, even off screen by the main guy. For example, say you're playing the game Call of Cthulhu. You could have a crack team of army agents or an army patrol killed off. If you're playing D&D, have a group of the King's Guard killed off, or some famous bandits, or some mean monsters. Now, in the great British TV show Primeval, there's a scene where the heroes find out that something has broken into the lion compound at the zoo and eaten the lions. You don't see the creature that killed him, but the fact that it was able to hunt and kill lions is a pretty good way to make you nervous about what the monster is. Imagine that in your game, your big monster is going to be a Shoggoth. Okay. Now, in a D&D campaign, a way to make you scared of the Shoggoth is the players might enter the lair of a dragon they've been planning to kill and find out that the dragon is crushed, charred bones. Something destroyed it. And if the thing that killed it left the dragon's treasure behind, because why does a Shoggoth need money? That might frighten the players even more. It didn't need the dragon's treasure. Of course, the players are happy they got the treasure, but they're like, it ate a dragon. Now, this is aimed at high-end players who might go after a dragon. If they're not players, if your players aren't at that level, have the monster eat a lair of ogres or a bunch of minotaurs, whatever it is, doesn't matter. Something that the players have reason to fear was killed by the monster. Now, frankly, it's easier to get players in Call of Cthulhu to be willing to be cautious around combat, because in D&D, players are usually trained to leap into combat, and they have fewer skills and traits to help them investigate. Now, if the players must have some combat in D&D, you can feed lesser enemies to them, but still keep them scared of the big guys that are scary. Also, another advantage you have at playing Call of Cthulhu as opposed to D&D is that in Call of Cthulhu, your characters, like, their hit points don't get up. They aren't more survivable over time. They just get smarter. In D&D, they tend to get tougher and tougher. Of course, this is easily handled in a game like Sandy Petersen's Cthulhu Mythos because the monsters are so gruesome that even the toughest guy is going to have problems. So show them the monster's tough by killing someone else, then the players will know to be scared. Happy gaming!